Okay, colleagues, welcome back after lunch. And without further delay, I would like to invite Mr. Colin O'Hare from the Department of Communication, Climate Action and Environment to deliver a brief presentation of Ireland. You got the floor.
Thanks very much, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, I'd like to start by echoing the appreciation given by my colleagues here today to the transparency and the experience sharing provided through this multilateral assessment process. I'd also like to thank my fellow EU colleagues this morning who gave an outline of the 2020 targets for the EU and its member states. I plan to use their eloquence to help me be brief. So to begin, Ireland is a small rock off the northwest coast of Europe, has a population of 4.75 million, 1/3 of whom live in the Greater Dublin area. Ireland has a significant dispersed rural population and experienced a significant economic downturn from 2007 to 2013, which has since been followed by significant economic growth. What I plan to do today is to talk over the biennial report and a summary of what's in it, and then to discuss some of the major developments relevant to this process since its publication. The second biennial report was submitted in January 2016. We had a technical review in June of 2016 and a Q&A, as you alluded to, in February of 2017. The headline statistics from our biennial report. Our total 2013 greenhouse gas emissions came to 58,820 kilotons of CO2 equivalent. That was 3.6% above our 1990 levels, but 18.1% lower than Ireland's peak in 2001. Where did the emissions come from? Our energy sector accounts for 61% of our emissions, principally from fuel combustion. The largest increase in 2013 came from the transport sector. Behind that, agriculture clocks in at about 1/3 of them, and that was 8.5% below Ireland's levels of 1990. The others, waste and industry, come to roughly 7%. And these emissions are comprised 63.1% CO2, 22.5% methane, nitrous oxide at 12.1%, and the rest at 2.3%. Ireland aims to reduce its emissions in line with the EU, and as I said, we've heard that earlier today. The emissions target, the ETS, Ireland's ETS emissions in 2014, which come underneath the ETS target of the EU of 21%, were 29% below Ireland's 2005 levels. And Ireland's target within the EU target of 20%, of the non-ETS of 10%, is to drop from 4% below our 2005 levels to 20% below them in 2020. The EU is progressing well towards accomplishing its 2020 target. In 2014, its greenhouse gas emissions were 23% below 1990, and it's estimated that in 2015 it'll be 22% below 1990. The EU has succeeded in decoupling growth from emissions and has seen its GDP grow by 50% over the same period. Ireland's progress towards 2020 targets are tracked annually by our Environmental Protection Agency. They publish assessments every year which revise our progress towards 2020. The most recent set of projections were published last month in April 2017. In the April 2017 publication, Ireland is estimated that in 2020 our non-ETS emissions will be 4 to 6% below our 2005 levels, as opposed to our 20% target. The EPA also published that our ETS emissions in 2016 are estimated to increase at 5.3% over our 2015 levels. Ireland, as I said, saw a decrease in emissions from 2001 to 2013. The biennial report outlines that our emissions in 2001, when we peaked, were at 71.8 megatons of CO2 equivalent, and in 2013 they were 58.8. The EPA projections estimate that there will be decreases in emissions between now and 2020 in the energy sector of 26%, F-gases will decrease by 19.8%, and waste emissions will decrease by 36%. On the other hand, increases are also expected between 2015 and 2020, with industrial emissions expected to increase by 13.3, commercial and public services to increase by 8.5, agriculture to increase by 4%, and transport to increase by 10%. The net result of all this is that on its current trajectory, Ireland is estimated to exceed its 2020 target by 13.7 megatons of CO2 equivalent. Clearly, this is challenging. Our recession from 2009 to 2013 reduced our emissions, but it also reduced our capacity to introduce the institutional structures we needed to make sure they'd stay down. And strong economic growth since 2013 has unfortunately seen something of a continued reliance on fossil fuels in the industry and electricity generation areas within our ETS sector. So what are we doing? Ireland's main objective now is to have a coordinated cross-sectoral response to deal with all the issues we need to deal with in order to get on track to decarbonisation. Our National Policy Position of 2014, our Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act of 2015, and through that the National Mitigation Plan, which will drive our decarbonisation agenda, and we're also participating in the review of the EU ETS. To elaborate a little on these, our National Policy Position sets out a high-level policy direction to guide Ireland in adopting and implementing plans. It outlines the need to transition to a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy by 2050. And then the Climate Act provides a legislative structure to underpin the sectoral actions and to underpin our national policy position. There's quite a lot in our Climate Act, but of most relevance to the multilateral assessment process, the National Mitigation Plan structure will see us submit our first National Mitigation Plan to government next month in June 2017. And a series of plans introduced at least every 5 years will incrementally drive our low-carbon transition to achieve our goal. On the wider level, Ireland is fully intends, I'm not going to outline again what the EU is doing to 2030, you've heard that already, but Ireland fully intends to play its part in this process. These national mitigation plans will bring about the mitigation measures we need to reverse our upward trend in emissions. They will see us pursue the pathways we need to achieve decarbonisation, and we will participate fully in the ETS review, which we hope will help break Ireland's reliance on fossil fuels. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for very concise presentation. Colleagues, it's now time for you to start asking questions. Who's going to be the first? China is the first. You've got the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Thanks for the presentation by Ireland. According to the conclusion of the ERT, and we noticed that Ireland may face challenges in achieving its target, even if all additional policy measures are implemented by 2020. So could you please elaborate some more effective additional measures that may help to achieve your 2020 target? Thank you.
Thank you very much. New Zealand, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you to Ireland for the presentation. We noted in the presentation the importance of the agriculture sector for Ireland, so we're wondering what efforts is Ireland undertaking in that sector to ensure this sector contributes to meeting its 2020 target and also contributes to increasing Ireland's ambition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Canada.
Thank you, Chair, and appreciate the excellent presentation from Ireland. I was wondering if Ireland could perhaps elaborate a little bit with regard to its national policy position towards 2050 a low carbon transition on some of the engagement with subnational authorities and how that's been a key factor in sort of starting to implement those plans. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And India, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ireland, for a very good presentation. Carbon tax scheme and use of revenue as an accelerated capital allowance is something which is worth a praise, under which you are saying that a company can claim 100% of the capital cost of certain energy efficient plants and machinery. Our question is it linked to the ETS scheme? Can the companies under an ETS cap claim such a capital cost? The other question is that sectors under the ESD account for 73% of emissions in Ireland. It is suggested in the report that non-ETS emissions were about 13% below 2005 levels. To what extent has the ETS helped in lowering emissions in the ETS sectors? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Ireland, it's your turn.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for the questions. Firstly, touching on the question raised by China, as I said, we have a national mitigation plan, which we've just ended a public consultation on, and it is on the basis of the measures that are currently in place or proposed that the projections by our Environmental Protection Agency outlined the trajectory we're on. Now, along with that, in our national mitigation plan, we've a number of proposed measures, and while we don't expect that our list of proposed measures is going to completely turn the curve, and further measures will also be required if we're going to achieve our targets, those measures which are under consideration include renewable electricity support scheme, increased electricity connectivity, the future role of one of our main power stations, the renewable heat incentive, smart metering, minimal thermal standards in properties, voluntary housing association upgrades, low emission vehicle incentivization, public transport investment, supports and incentives to modal shift, taxation policy development, biofuels obligation scheme development, eco-driving, a national policy on parking, a reduction of the top speed limits on the motorways, and a forest cover expansion post-2020. As I said, it's not an extensive list of everything we're going to need to do, but those are the ones under consideration at the moment. Moving on to New Zealand's question, and thanks for that. I suppose to start, Ireland's agricultural production is recognised by the International Independent Analysis as having one of the lowest carbon footprints internationally. The European Commission's JRC report of 2010, evaluation of livestock sector's contribution to the EU greenhouse gas emissions, that report recognised that Ireland, along with Austria, has the lowest cow milk emissions per unit, and beef is the 5th lowest. While efficiencies have lowered the emission intensity of food produced, they have also contributed to reductions in absolute agricultural emissions. The long-term policy vision for the sector is an approach to carbon neutrality in the agriculture and land use sector, including forestry, which does not compromise the capacity for sustainable food production. However, as we are approaching the limit of achievable efficiencies, it will be a challenge for us to maintain our downward trajectory. Much of the low-hanging fruit in this area has already been picked. Within Ireland, our Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine continues to actively engage in a whole-of-government approach on climate policy that I outlined, and they are joining in finding the best options to encourage sustainable intensification of food production, while optimising the sector's contribution to GHG mitigation and sequestration, including through afforestation and a number of other forest sector activities. Our Agricultural Department has a 3-tack approach to enhancing action from agriculture. Under its 10-year agri-food process, it has established an Environmental Sustainability Committee, and they are there to ensure collaboration between stakeholders and to monitor and oversee the implementation of progress. This has allowed us to become a world leader in areas such as sustainable auditing and carbon footprinting under our Origin Green programme. That's our national sustainability programme for food and drink industry, which unites government, the private sector and food producers. And almost 50,000 of our beef farmers and almost all of our dairy farmers are carbon audited. This programme is implementing climate action measures with farmers, such as through improved efficiency of fertiliser and manure use, grassland management, improved breeding and better fertility. Knowledge transfer and extension is central to bringing the latest innovative sustainability research and practices direct to farmers. Although we have many tools, such as I think there's a pasture profit index and there's a carbon navigator tool, the one I'd like to take the opportunity today to highlight is our beef data and genomics programme, which is directly targeting the climate emissions of 30,000 beef farmers. Its objective is to lower the intensity of GHG emissions by improving the quality and efficiency of the national beef herd. This will be done mainly through feeding data from these farms into a breeding index. This ranks the efficiency of animals on a star-based system, and that can inform the farmer in selecting the most robust and resource-efficient suckler cow replacements. This programme will not only improve the environmental sustainability of beef production, it will also bring economic benefits directly to the farmer. Finally, in New Zealand, we also continue to engage and support agricultural research, including international initiatives such as the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases, EU Joint Programming Initiative on Agriculture, Food Security and Climate Change. And these are, of course, of particular importance to exploring new solutions to reducing emissions and also to improving the transparency of climate action and to ensure it's reported in our national inventory. Moving on to Canada's question on the engagement. The implementation of mitigation measures in Ireland, as I outlined with our national mitigation plan, it's largely driven by direct engagement from the ministries with responsibility for the emissions who deal directly with their contacts at emission source level. However, as I outlined under the Climate Act, we have this engagement now placed on a statutory basis. And one area we can see this is in the capacity of the local authority structure in Ireland to now report directly to our Minister on mitigation measures. Under the Act, appropriate bodies have to have regard to our national mitigation plans on the furtherance of our national transition objective. They may be asked to submit details of their plans in this regard, or they may be directed by our Minister to adopt certain actions. As I said, our first mitigation plan is being presented to government next month, so the nature of these interactions I'll know a little more about further down the line. In relation to engagement with non-state actors, Ireland had a number of public participatory processes on the National Mitigation Plan, which included early sectoral consultation papers, a number of sectoral workshops, a broader public consultation on the development of the plan, and consultations on our strategic environmental assessment and appropriate assessment of the plan. Beyond that, we also have a number of key initiatives on the whole area of engagement. Our Minister announced a national dialogue on climate action a few weeks back. This is going to build on a commitment from our programme for government and on the Energy White Paper, which is referred to in the biennial report. We're aiming to ensure that representatives of civil society can input into this process so as to maximise consensus in climate action. We're designing an appropriate network to secure evidence-based inputs on the economic, social, behavioural, environmental and public aspects of climate change policy. We will look to engage all of Ireland's society, from politicians, citizen groups, communities, business, the NGO sector and young people. To do this, we obviously will need a coherent structure in order to balance a wide representative participation with an efficient work programme. Further details on this will be announced in the coming weeks. I suspect our national communication at the end of this year will probably be able to help me to discuss any lessons learned through this process. Moving on then to the questions from India. The first question on the carbon tax and the use of revenues, and about whether companies can claim allowances where they're linked to the ETS. I'm afraid I'm going to need to clarify that with some of my colleagues back home, but I might engage with you bilaterally later on that. On the second question on the ETS sectors, which account for only, well, the non-ETS is the key area for Ireland's emissions. Our ETS is, I think it's roughly a quarter of our industry. And as outlined in my presentation, the ETS emissions have dropped consistently since 2001, although they did rise last year, and that's probably most directly attributable to our economic growth. The main challenge for Ireland is in the non-ETS sector. I think the ETS, as I said, I mean, we do have the problem that our energy provision does still rely to a certain extent on fossil fuels, and we are looking to decouple that, and we're supporting the European Union as we develop a review of the ETS at the moment. So hopefully that will see an improvement on that side of things. And as I said, I'll get back to you myself on the issue of how the carbon tax interacts with the ETS. I think I have everything there, Chair.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other flag raised, so it means there are no further questions. Thank you very much. Congratulations. And we are now turning to Japan, and I'm passing over chairing of this meeting to my vice chair, Mr. Shen, who will guide this multilateral assessment further.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm very happy to chair the rest section of this afternoon. And my name is Chen Zhihua. I'm the SBI Vice Chair, and very happy to chair the rest of this section. Now let's move on to Japan, and I would like to invite Mr. Mikio Mori, Deputy Director General, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to deliver a brief presentation. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and good afternoon. Good afternoon to everybody. I appreciate very much this opportunity to introduce Japan's climate change policies and progress made to date. This multilateral assessment process is an important mechanism to ensure transparency and comparability of mitigation efforts and to share learnings and experiences among all parties. I also appreciate questions received from colleagues in advance. Japan is fully committed to the IAR process, and I look forward to active discussion following my presentation. The first slide shows the outline of presentation today. First, I will explain Japan's greenhouse gas emissions and trends, followed by national circumstances. I will then provide an overview on Japan's GHG emission reduction target and policies and measures Japan has taken to achieve its 2030 target. GHG emission trends. Let me begin with trends of Japan's greenhouse gas emissions since 1990. It decreased from 2007 to 2009, mainly due to the global financial crisis. In 2010, the emission increased due to increased economic activities. Additionally, the GHG emissions increased further from 2011 because of the expansion of fossil fuel-fired power plants as a consequence of the suspension of nuclear plants after the Great East Japan earthquake. However, 2 years in a row from 2014, emissions decreased due to the progress with energy-saving activities and improvement of emission intensity of electricity. In 2015, Japan's total emissions were estimated to be 1,325 megaton carbon dioxide equivalent. The pie chart on the right side illustrates the breakdown of 2015 emissions by sector. The largest emission source is the energy sector, which covers around 89% of total emissions. This slide shows emission trends inside Japan by sector and by gas. From 2010 to 2013, CO2 emissions from the energy sector increased because of increasing economic activities by economic recovery in 2010. The growing operation of fossil fuel-fired power plants as a consequence of the suspension of nuclear reactors from 2010 to 2013 also contributed to this increase. From 2014, however, CO2 emissions from the energy sector decreased due to the progress in energy-saving activities and improvement of emission intensity of electricity. In emissions trend by gas, methane and nitrous oxide emissions have decreased as a result of implementation of policies and measures. On the other hand, F-gases emissions are increasing as hydrofluorocarbons, the ozone-depleting substances, are replaced by hydrofluorocarbons. This slide shows Japan's final energy consumption, GDP, and GHG emissions. You find in the left graph, the energy consumption decreased even after the accident of the nuclear power plants in 2011. This trend represents the progress in energy-saving activities. The right graph shows a decoupling trend. In the recent years, GDP is growing, but the GHG emissions are decreasing. Also, GHG intensity of GDP is presented, and it has been in decreasing trend since the mid-1990s. I would now like to reiterate recent events that enormously affected Japan's economy and society. When it comes to Japan's GHG emission trends, the damage caused by the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami on 11th March 2011 should not be overlooked. The earthquake with the largest magnitude recorded in Japan's history and tsunami had a huge impact on Japanese economy and society. After the accident at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, all 48 reactors for commercial use was suspended. Electricity generation by nuclear power has decreased drastically after the accident and has been replaced by fossil fuel-fired power. As a result, CO2 emissions since 2011 have increased temporarily as shown in the previous slides. Let us now move to Japan's emission reduction target. This slide shows Japan's 2020 as well as 2030 reduction target. Japan revised the 2020 target in May 2016. It is to achieve more than 3.8% reduction against 2005. Also, Japan submitted the 2030 target as its NDC. The target is to achieve 26.0% reduction against 2013, 25.4% reduction against 2005. These targets cover all gas and sectors and are calculated with 100 years GWP of the IPCC Force Assessment Report. Also, Japan's reduction target includes removals from LULUCF sector, and these are calculated using activity-based approach. In this section of policies and measures, I would like to provide an overview on Japan's policy against global warming, its energy policy, as well as some specific measures. In May 2016, Japan formulated Plan for Global Warming Countermeasures. This plan was decided by the Japanese cabinet and announced by the government in accordance with Japan's Global Warming Countermeasure Act, in order to promote global warming countermeasures comprehensively and strategically. The plan defines a path to achieve a midterm target of 26.0% greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2030, consistent with Japan's NDC, and identifies policies and measures to be implemented. The plan also sets a long-term goal to aim to reduce greenhouse gas emission by 80% by fiscal year 2050, while pursuing the global warming countermeasures and the economic growth at the same time under international coordination. This plan is Japan's foundation to progress the global warming countermeasures. As I already stated, energy-originated CO2 emission accounts for approximately 90% in Japanese GHG emissions. Basic principles of Japanese energy policy are 3E plus S, namely energy security, economic efficiency, environment, and safety. We are rolling out various energy measures based on these principles. The following 3 slides outline examples of measures based on Japan's energy policy. This slide shows the measures in industry and energy conversion sectors. 114 major industrial associations in electric, oil and gas, iron, steel, chemical, electronics and machinery, automobile, etc., have been tackling with climate change actions through their voluntary action plans, or VAPs. The VAPs cover more than half of Japan's energy-originated CO2 emissions and roughly 80% of energy and industry sectors. Energy efficient and environmentally friendly products and infrastructures they produce have contributed low carbonization of economy and society. Industry's VAPs are rigorously reviewed by government councils and reported to the Global Warming Prevention Headquarters, which Prime Minister himself presides. When industries achieve their own reduction targets, they will set more ambitious targets. 2 decades long effort since 1997 to 2015 resulted in nearly 15% reduction in CO2 emissions from energy conversion and industrial sectors. Low carbonization of electricity is one of the most challenging and critical issues. Japan set 44% of non-fossil fuel power supply, or renewable and nuclear, as a policy goal. Japan introduced the free in tariff scheme since July 2012 By this scheme, renewable energy increased 2.5 times over 4 years and a half. We need further effort to achieve 2030 target. As to nuclear power, Japan is utilizing nuclear power generation whose safety is confirmed. Next, I will highlight a few measures taken in Japan domestically regarding energy conservation and reduction. As to energy conservation, the Act on Renewable Use of Energy, Act on Renewable Use of Energy requires major factories and offices to improve energy efficiency more than 1% annually. The Act also introduced Top Runner program. The Top Runner program is a mandatory program for automobile, house appliances, and other consumer products to fulfill the energy efficiency target within 3 to 10 years. By this program, the energy efficiency of air conditioners and passenger vehicles have been improved about 31% and 97% respectively. Japan is also tackling with emission reduction from housings and buildings and transportation sectors. Emission from transportation sector has already peaked out in 2001 and in a trend of declining for the past 15 years. Japan is seeking to further reduction by promoting next generation vehicles such as electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles. For housing and building sectors, the government plans to make it mandatory to comply with energy efficiency standards for newly constructed houses and buildings by 2020. Both government and industries promoted net zero energy buildings, or ZEB, and net zero energy housing, or ZEH. By nature, it may take time to spread ZEBs and ZEHs nationwide, but the government intends to utilize regulatory measures and financial supports to back up this initiative. Raising public awareness on climate change and global warming countermeasures is another important policy measures Japan is undertaking. For drastic emission reduction in residential and commercial sectors, it's necessary to change the public mindset and behavior. Japan launched a nationwide campaign called Cool Choice. This campaign aims to develop a sense of urgency on global warming crisis and communicates the merit of choosing low carbon products, services, and lifestyle to encourage citizens to take actions. The campaign covers activities such as education and awareness raising, promoting replacement to LED and energy efficient appliances, and promoting of using public transport. These activities encourage the citizens to carry out proactive and voluntary actions. In the next 2 slides, I would like to explain Japan's key efforts in the area of international cooperation and global emission reduction. Japan has been working to advocate for advanced low carbon technologies through implementation of the Joint Credit Mechanism, or JCM. More than 100 emission reduction projects have been planned and implemented. About a half of them have already started its operation. 16 JCM projects have been registered and approximately 500 ton CO2 JCM credits have been issued. Japan will continue to support, among others, further project formulations in order to implement JCM more effectively and efficiently. At COP22 in Paris in 2015, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe announced the Action for Cool Earth 2.0, namely ACE 2.0, and pledged to provide in 2020 approximately 1.3 trillion Japanese yen, equivalent to 10.6 billion US dollars, of public as well as private climate finance to developing countries. Japan will contribute to achieve the commitment made at the COP15 the mobilization of 100 billion US dollars in climate finance annually in 2020 in developing countries. In addition, Japan places emphasis on innovation in addressing climate change issues. We continue to hold an annual global conference on innovative technologies, which is called ICEF, or Innovation for Cool Earth Forum. ICEF was launched to accelerate global development of innovative activities by promoting discussions and cooperation among leaders of industry, government, and academia. At the COP22 in November 2016, we announced Japan's assistance initiative to address climate change. This initiative introduced Japan's policy and measures for developing countries to support the implementation of Paris Agreement and achieving their NDCs steadily by sharing knowledge and implementing projects in mitigation, adaptation, transparency, controlling emission of fluorocarbons, and co-benefits with SDGs. Japan can contribute to play a leading role in international efforts to address climate change by those initiatives. Last but not least, I would like to provide an update on Japan's domestic consideration regarding long-term low GHG emission development strategy. With regard to its long-term strategy, the government established domestic committees by experts among relevant ministries to consider and discuss the issue. Its submission timing is yet to be decided. However, the whole process of strategy formulation will be progressed in line with commitment made as per G7 Ise-Shima Leaders' Declaration. The declaration states that the G7 members commit to formulate and communicate ambitious mid-century long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies well ahead of the 2020 deadline. Japan is on track to fulfill its commitment. Let me conclude by summarizing today's presentation. Japan succeeded in reducing its emission in the recent 2 years, overcoming challenges of the Great East Japan earthquake. Japan is committed to achieve emission reduction targets by 2020, 3.8% or more emission reduction compared to 2005. By 2030, 26.0% reduction compared to 2013. Japan established a plan for global warming countermeasures that helps to implement a variety of policies and measures, which also mandates continuous progress review and promotes government and public-private partnerships to achieve the reduction targets. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank Japan for its presentation and now open the floor for other parties to raise their questions. I have Korea, Luxembourg, France, EU, New Zealand, and India. So, Korea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Japan, for giving comprehensive presentation. I was very impressed by transparent and systematic PR2. GHG emission from power generation shows a dramatic increase to compare to those of the year 2005. Okay, so Japan mentioned that energy mix of fossil fuel has increased dramatically after tragic accident of a nuclear power plant in 2011. And Japan planned to adopt more renewable energy sources. However, I cannot see any specific targets for the renewable energy. So could you, Japan, show the shared targets of renewable energy in the future energy mix, if you have? Second one, Japan has tried to develop low carbon society since 2000 or earlier than that. However, I noticed that steady increase in GH emission from residential and commercial sectors, in spite of applying their intensive low carbon society policy. So can Japan kindly show the reduction contribution and the performance by applying low carbon society policy? That is my question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. I now turn to Luxembourg for.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Japan, for this very comprehensive and illustrative presentation. Yes, I have basically two questions. The first one is related to transport. You informed about measures about cars as such, but could you provide, in addition to those measures, also more information on key policies that tend to decarbonize the transport sector as a whole? And second, we would be interested to have some more information on how policies related to research and development and innovation have also supported the decarbonization, as mentioned by my Korean colleague, of the Japanese economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Luxembourg. And now to invite France to raise your questions. France, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Japan for the presentation, which was really very interesting. My question is about the quantification of measures in the framework of the plan for global warming countermeasures. In your biennial report, there was some information about the quantification of effects, but it was only for some policies and measures. During the written session of the multilateral assessment, you answered to the question that you were intending to have more quantifications of policies and measures in the framework of the plan of countermeasures. And so my question is, could you provide some information about this quantification and what was done and what was possible to do in the plan?
So in this first round, we already have three parties raise their question. We now have 5 to 6 questions already, and now invite Japan to make a response to those questions, and then I will go to the second round of parties' question. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since I have two experts to respond to some of the specific questions, allow me to first ask my colleague to answer some of the questions.
Thank you very much. Let me quickly respond to the Korea's first question regarding to the renewable energies target. We have an energy mix in 2030. The energy mix is a Japanese energy demand and supply outlook. In that mix, we set 22 to 24% of renewable electricity. That's a current target. Thank you.
Thank you. And regarding the question about the quantification of the measures which are reported under the BR2, and as we already answered in written answer, at the moment when the BR2 was stipulated, we are in the process of developing a national plan, which is, the name is countermeasures of the global warming, which is our national plan. And after the completion of the national plan, I think we will be able to include those specific data. Quantitative analysis will be put in our next report. But for your information, let me introduce a couple of data which we currently have. For example, in the residential sector, we are going to introduce the highly energy efficient equipment we will promote such kind of dissemination, and then we expect 15 million ton CO2, for example, at 2030. And we will also try to enhance the energy efficiency of houses, and it will lead to, for example, 10 million ton CO2 at 2030 by it's due to the improvement of the energy efficiency. Regarding the commercial sector, as introduced in the presentation, we have the Top Runner program, and which will be able to contribute to the energy and emission reduction in 2030, for example, by improving the energy efficiency of equipment and devices based on this program, which will lead to 17 million ton CO2 and emission reduction in 2030 by improvement of the energy efficiency performance of buildings will be 12 million ton CO2. And this kind of the detailed information will be certainly included in our next report. Thank you. And
and now I will respond back to the Luxembourg's question regarding the transportation sector first. Transportation sectors, it accounts for roughly 1/5 of Japanese GHG emissions. It's a big sectors. And our centerpiece of the countermeasures is the Top Runner program, which set fuel efficiency target, asking the automobile manufacturer to improve fuel efficiency. And just have a presentation explaining. We have introduced this program in 1998, right after Kyoto Protocol, COP3 meetings. And our emission from the transportation sector has showed continuous declining trend since 2001. And also, Japanese government is promoting the next generation vehicles, such as electric vehicle, plug-in hybrid vehicle, and also FCV, fuel cell vehicles. We have some kind of roadmap to promoting the EV, FCV, and PHV. And our target is in 2030, the new car sales, around 50 to 70% of the new car sales could be this kind of next generation vehicle. That's a target. And we have a policy measure to support this program, this target. By financial supporting, we will create the initial market. And also we support R&D activity for manufacturers. And also we are supporting the infrastructure development to fueling this kind of new next generation vehicle. And also I have responded back to the R&D initiatives. Energy and environmental technology innovation has been the centerpiece of Japanese mitigation efforts. It takes time, actually, and sometimes decades-long patience is needed until society fully benefit from this R&D activities. Japanese efforts actually date back to early 1980s, right after the two big oil crises, the shocking effect to the Japanese economy. And Japan promoted R&D in energy and environment fields that resulted in actually 35% improvement of energy efficiency in 20 years. So starting from 1980s, in early 2000, we have recorded 35% increase of the efficiency. By these efforts, Japanese industries strengthen its competitiveness as well. As of today, Japanese government allocated a lot of money in public-led R&D activities and R&D investment. And actually last year, April, the government made a plan called the National Energy and Environment Strategy for Technology Innovation towards 2050, and try to push innovative R&D in renewables, batteries, hydrogen, etc., that could contribute actually several billions tons of reduction globally. Thank you very much.
And one more thing, let me respond to the question made by Korea regarding the low carbon, the path to the low carbon society, and yeah, I'm going to make a brief introduction about the current situation of the commercial sector and also the household. And I will come back later, but I will give you a more explanatory introduction with some data. So give me a little bit more time.
Thank you, Japan. I would allow you to come back later. Maybe let's move to the rest speakers that I now have EU, New Zealand, India, Switzerland, China on my list. So that the next speaker is EU. EU, you have the floor.
Thank you. We would like also to thank Japan. It was a very good presentation and very thorough. You went into a lot of details, so we have a couple of questions. Hope we can answer. The first question is related to climate energy policies. Could Japan provide information on how climate and energy policies are coordinated, including coordination between the ministries concerning the mid-century strategy? This is the first question. The second question is related to your 2020 target. Japan's 2020 target is a reduction of 3.8%, as you explained very well, compared to 2005 levels. Given progress so far, can Japan give a more precise indication of what it's likely to be achieved by 2020? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now to invite New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Japan, for the presentation. And also thank you for introducing the joint crediting mechanism in your slide, I think, on international cooperation. I've got a question about that. So what contribution does Japan expect the joint crediting mechanism to play in meeting its 2020 target? And what role does it expect the JCM to play beyond 2020? Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand, for your very brief intervention. And now invite Switzerland to raise their question.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And thank you, Japan, for a very comprehensive report and a very detailed presentation. We actually had two questions. The first one you already answered on your incentives that you plan to give for the next generation cars. The other one relates to the provision of financial technology and capacity building support to developing countries. Japan is the leading funder of coal power plants in developing countries. Do you account that one also under your provision of financial support and technology support in your report? I read it, but I wasn't fully sure. Maybe you could elaborate on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And if Japan is ready, I now invite Japan to make their response to those three parties' questions. If possible, also the remaining question and things from Korea.
Thank you very much. Let me first respond to the question made by Korea. And now I have a data. First, let me make a brief introduction about the current status and its trend of the energy consumption in the household. In the residential sector, the amount of energy consumption per household has been decreasing since 2000. And in fact, it has decreased by about 25% in 2015 compared to 2000. Also, the amount of energy consumption per capita decreased significantly after the earthquakes, and it decreased by about 13% in 2015 compared to 2000. And the commercial sector. In the commercial sector, the energy consumption per floor area has decreased by about 18% in 2015 compared to 2000 level. And it is an observation that these effects are due to the introduction of energy saving equipment and also through the energy efficiency improvement. Having said that, on the other hand, the efforts toward a low carbon society in residential and commercial households they are influenced by various factors such as increase in the number of households and expanding the floor areas in the commercial sector, and a change of the emission factor of electric power. So it is a little bit difficult for us to separate clearly the efforts towards a low carbon society, but the progress is ongoing. Thank you. And let me return to the question made by EU about the policy coordination. As introduced in the presentation, we have checking and coordination mechanism as overarching ones in the government. We have as we mentioned in the presentation, we have the Global Warming Prevention Headquarters, which Prime Minister presides, and under this headquarters, all the relevant policies are coordinated, and then the decisions made, and then the measures will be implemented. And as also mentioned in the presentation, as energy-oriented CO2 emission accounts for approximately 90% in Japanese GHG emissions, so energy policies take an important role for climate change policies, undoubtedly. Therefore, we have very frequent discussions with both sides from the environment and the energy, and our 2030 target of 26% reduction is developed in consistent with the energy policies, I would say. それぐらいですかね。あと、ネクストジェネレーションの話、車の話をして、あと 3.8% の話をしました。はい。
I will respond back to the Switzerland's question regarding to the incentives for the automobile sectors. I don't have an exact number, but roughly speaking, we have a subsidy and tax break incentives. So it depends on how much innovative automobile we are targeting on. But the basic vehicles, it could be several hundred $US or so tax break or subsidies. And regarding to the FCV, fuel cell vehicle, it's very innovative one that amount to be more higher incentives.
And next, let me return to the question made by EU regarding the 3.8% and more detailed explanation or the other more defined value can be Japan's, as already mentioned, where Japanese 2020 target is 3.8% or more. And we believe that having achieved 2020 target at this point can be appreciated to some extent. However, it is not appropriate at this moment to judge its achievement based on 2015 values. That's because GHG emissions are affected by various factors such as socioeconomic circumstances and climate change effects, as well as policies and measures. As also we already mentioned on July 2015, Japan has set the GHG reduction target in 2030, which is 26% reduction from 2013 to 2030, and we submitted it to the UNFCCC Secretariat on June 2016. According, Japan decided the plan for global warming countermeasures, which shows policies and measures to achieve the emission reduction target and started mitigation actions based on the plan. For your information, in the last 2 years, we have achieved a 6% reduction of greenhouse gases, which is very significant, but still we think that we have to maintain order and our efforts, and it is very important, we believe, to continue steady efforts toward achieving the 2030 targets. And one more question about the JCM, about the credit. Credits acquired from the JCL will be used to achieve Japan's emission reduction target for 2020. The exact amount of JCM credits to be used is not estimated at this moment. And let me add one more thing, that our 2030 target is 26% reduction. And in order to achieve this 26% reduction, only the domestic efforts need to be made. So the 26% reduction should be achieved by the efforts through of the measures that are taken in a country. Thank you very much.
And let me complete this round by answering Swiss question on coal plants. Yes, we count the coal plants projects in our BR. As you may be aware, we consider financing for high efficiency coal plants should be considered as a form of climate financing. And we have provided $3.2 billion US for such projects in 2013 to 2014. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan, for your response to party's question. And now I still have 2 remaining parties. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And my commendations to the distinguished delegate from Japan for very nice and impressive presentation. Our question is, has the mitigation potential for various climate-related programs in Japan been quantified? If yes, which sector or sectors has or have the minimum abatement cost, and where would Japan target its efforts in future? Thank you.
Thank you, India. And now invite China to raise your question. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the comprehensive presentation by Japan. Very beautiful slides. And we have questions about the nuclear. It's it's glad to see that the contribution of nuclear energy and policy measures that are expected to deliver more significant emission reduction in the energy sector. And could you please provide more information on how this nuclear energy plan are implemented subnationally? And could you please also provide some more policy measures that ensure the security issue about the nuclear energy? Thank you.
Thank you. And now turn to Japan for answering those questions. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, India, for your interest in Japanese approach. And unfortunately, we don't have the data regarding the estimated costs, but we do have the data regarding the estimated reduction volume of relevant measures that will be taken until toward the 2030. And as I already mentioned in my previous intervention, we will include the detailed information and data in our next report. So please, I will encourage please be patient a little bit. Each sector has we have very holistic. We are taking a very holistic approach when we carry out our relevant measures in each sector, and we are taking a building block approach, and our estimated volume is based on the measures which will be taken into account. So we can provide the estimated reduction volume of GHG in each sector, sector by sector, and gas by gas. So that's the decision, but we don't have, sorry, at this moment, we don't have any data regarding the estimated cost. Thank you.
Lastly, I will respond back to the Chinese question regarding the nuclear. Thank you very much for asking the nuclear issues. We are thinking about nuclear power plants indispensable to realize securing stable energy supply, reducing electricity cost, and reducing CO2 emissions. This nuclear is a key of our energy policies. And if the Nuclear Regulation Authority, NRA, finds a nuclear power plant is safety level is satisfied the strict test standards in the world, it's a government's policy to respect the judgment by the authority and proceed with the restart of the nuclear power plant. And this policy, currently 3 plants are in operation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan, and I hope you all get a satisfactory response from our colleague from Japan. And if no more further question, that would conclude the multilateral assessment of Japan. And now we would like to move to Kazakhstan. I hope that we can also have a very brief presentation. Thank you very much. Let me invite Dr. Irina Yesakopova, Director of the Greenhouse Gas Inventory Department Cooperation under the Ministry of Energy, to deliver a brief presentation. Kazakhstan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to propose your presentation of Kazakhstan on the multilateral assessment of progress of Kazakhstan towards achieving the economy-wide emission reduction targets. Kazakhstan is Annex 1 party, as it is defined in paragraph 7 of Article 1 of the Kyoto Protocol. And this slide demonstrates the national conditions of the Republic of Kazakhstan, which is the ninth largest countries of the world with low population density, only 6 people per square kilometer, with population 7 million people, more than 7 million people, and GDP about 105,000 US dollars. Kazakhstan is rich by natural resources like oil, gas, and coal, iron, copper, and other natural resources. Thank you all the parties who asked the questions during the multilateral assessment procedure, and there was overall 13 questions asked for Kazakhstan, 5 questions concerning progress towards the achievement of its quantified economy-wide emission reduction target, 3 questions for emissions and removals related to its quantified economy-wide emission reduction target, and 5 questions to assumption, conditions, and methodologies related to the attainment of its quantified economy-wide emission reduction targets. As for quantified emission reduction targets, between 1990 and 2020, Kazakhstan, the emissions of Kazakhstan change from year to year, and now Kazakhstan intended to reduce emissions by 2020 by 15% in comparison with the level of 1990. Primarily through the implementation of the state program for the development of the agriculture and industrial complex adopted by the presidential decree in 2013 within the framework of the concept for the transition to a green economy, which sets the following goals and objectives till 2020. Increase the share of solar and wind energy by 3% by 2020. Increase the share of gas power stations to 20%, including conversion from coal to gas. Reduce the level of CO2 emissions from electricity production to increase the energy efficiency of GDP by 25% from the level of 2008. Most of these goals now have been already implemented. The share of alternative, mostly solar and wind energy sources in electricity generation in 2015 was 0.77%, and in 2016, 0.98%. The share of gas power stations now has already overcome a plan of 20% by 2020. The same can be told about gasification of regions. It reached more than 42% in 2015 and more than 46% in 2016. And the goal to increase energy efficiency of GDP by 25% by 2020 was fulfilled ahead of schedule by 2015. Based on the results of the emission inventory in 2020, by 2020, the goal of emissions reduction under the Paris Agreement may be reconsidered and increased after this year. The next question was about Kazakhstan's information on the emission reduction target in 15% by 2020. The technical potential of renewable energy in Kazakhstan significantly exceeds the projected level of electricity consumption in the country. The reduction of greenhouse gas emissions is implemented on the basis of the concept of the transition of the Republic of Kazakhstan to a green economy. In 2017, the action plan to the state program for the agricultural and industry complex development was adopted. The plan is updated annually and contains 141 measures, including the development of renewable energy production through a fixed tariff system, which assumes the initial certainty for investors in the form of guaranteed purchase of the whole amount of electricity from renewable energy sources at fixed tariffs adjusted to inflation rate. which allows to quickly launch the renewable energy sources market and implement the following types of renewable energy sources: wind, solar, and small hydro energy. The current trend of GHG emissions in Kazakhstan is upward. The keep emissions lower than the achieved level in order to increase the indicators of social and economic development. Kazakhstan needs, first of all, to achieve the goal set in the Green Economy Development Concept of the Republic of Kazakhstan adopted by the President Nazarbayev. Today, for Kazakhstan, the main directions for the transition to a low-carbon economy are to reduce the level of combustion and consumption on fossil fuels containing carbon, primarily coal and fuel oil. At the same time, according to expert judgments, the long-run technically possible renewable energy potential in Kazakhstan may significantly exceed the projected level of electricity consumption. Therefore, in order to further stimulate the transition to a low-emission economy and to increase the level of its socio-economic development, Kazakhstan needs to remain at a level that does not exceed its quantified economy-wide emission reduction targets, 15% less than the 1990 base level. The next slide demonstrates the progress achieved in national emission economy-wide emission reduction target. The national emission trading system of Kazakhstan and lesson learned. Related to additional information on the national emission trading system and carbon market. It was started in 2013, and in April 2016 it was suspended till the 1st January of 2018. The problem of emission trading system was ineffectiveness and imperfection of the historical method of quota allocation. As for experience and lessons learned, it may be concluded that based on the results of the emission trading system, the Ministry of Energy decided to change the quota allocation mechanism by means of benchmarking method. For more effectiveness of emission trading system, a strong political solution, a well-established monitoring, reporting, and verification system are needed. A correction of legislation and regulatory framework, qualified human potential in emission trading system regulating and administrating bodies, and other measures are needed. As you can see from this diagram showing the latest greenhouse gas emissions in Kazakhstan in 2015, the national emissions were low by 15% of its 1990 level with land use change, and by 23% lower of its base year without LULUCF sector. In 2015, compared to 2014, total GHG emissions dropped by 4% and 5% with and without LULUCF sector appropriately. Assumptions, conditions, and methodologies related to the attainment of its quantified economy emission reduction target. Kazakhstan uses 2006 IPCC guidelines for the preparation of national greenhouse gas energy since the year 2015. Now, Kazakhstan does not yet use the 2013 supplement of the IPCC guidelines for wetlands for national greenhouse gas inventories. In order to use it, special studies on land conversion are needed. At present, only CO2 emissions are calculated for lands converted to artificial reservoirs in the first year of the completion in accordance with the 2006 IPCC guidelines. In section 5.1.2, a simplified formula of the level of production calculation was given, where production depends on GDP. The question was to the assumptions, conditions, and methodology related to the attention of its quantified economy-wide emission reduction target. In section 5.1.2 of the Second biennial report, projections in the industrial process sector, since production is a function of GDP only. And the demand indirectly through GDP affects the level of industrial production through the anticipated future GDP growth rates, as the consumption and the net exports are the components of GDP. According to the forecast of the Ministry of National Economy for 2016-2020, the average annual increase in the gross value added of construction will be 3.3%. It is assumed that in the period 2020-2030, the real GDP growth rate will average 3% per year. Our next slide demonstrates the scenarios of greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector. And the scenario will be reconsidered. In the process of forecasting of GHG emissions in the scenario with measures, a number of policies and measures were taken into account. One of the key measures aimed at reducing emissions was the emission trading system. But at that time, it was not known if the restriction of ETS will be after 2020. And by this scenario, it was implied that the emission trading system will be stopped. That is why the growth rate of emissions in the scenario with measures exceeded the GHG emissions in the scenario without measures. During the preparation of greenhouse gas inventory emissions in 2016, there was a technical errors, and the key source analysis was not included into the series of tables by the technical reasons, but the text include the key source analysis of the whole inventory since 1990 to 2014. Because of the technical reasons, the results of the key source analysis were not adequately reflected in the series of reported tables. However, the text contains the key results. The total number of key sources for 1990 by level without LULUCF were 23 categories, and taking into account LULUCF sector, 26 categories. The number of key categories by level in 2014 without land use change sector is 21 categories, and taking into account LULUCF, 23 categories. All this information are included in the National Inventory Report, and you can see that the greatest contribution to the total emissions in 1990 is made by the category 1A1 fuel combustion energy solid fuel, CO2 emissions. Its share in the base year is 26.5%. and 25.4% without and with taking into account the LULUCF sector, respectively. The same category is on the first place among the key sources by the level in 2014. Its contribution is 27.9% and 23.4% for the level without LULUCF and with LULUCF. The greatest contribution to the total emissions by trend in 2014 without taking into account LULUCF is made by the categories 1A4 other sectors, solid fuels, CO2 emissions, and 1A5 other sectors, solid fuel, CO2, and 1B1 fugitive emissions from the combustion of solid fuels. All key source analysis results show that the category 1A1 is a key source in all four cases for both 1990 and 2014, with and without LULUCF sector in case of level assessment. Appropriately, in the case of trend assessment, the subcategory has taken 10th and 12th place with LULUCF and without LULUCF appropriately. On this slide, you can see the share of subcategory 1N1, one fuel combustion CO2 emissions, and it covers more than 15% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in Kazakhstan. As for F-gases, there was a question that the inventory chapter is not clear, indicates that F-gases has been presented in the inventory since 1990. Kazakhstan is not F-gases producer. They are imported from other countries, mainly from Chinese and European manufacturers. All substitutes for ozone depleting substances, as they have been used in Kazakhstan since middle 1990s. In 1994, only HFC 134A was presented with the amount of only 228 tons of CO2 equivalent. Their share in total national emissions from 1995 to 2014 in CO2 equivalent is hardly exceed 1% of the total national emissions. This slide demonstrates the feed-in tariffs for electricity generated by renewable energy sources, which were approved by the decree of the government of Kazakhstan in June 2014. The approved fixed tariffs are indexed annually, taking into account inflation and change in the exchange rate of the national currency. By the order of the Ministry of Energy of the Republic of Kazakhstan of November 2016, the target indicators for the development of the renewable energy sector were approved until 2020. With a view to leveling technological risks and risks of overabundance of expensive facilities, the Ministry of Energy focused on less expensive wind energy with a share in the amount of renewable energy sources at least 50%, and solar to develop in the amount of not more than 25%. The rest is redistributed between small hydropower plants and biogas plants. At the end of presentations, I would like to recall you about the organization of Expo 2017, which will be a large event hosted by Kazakhstan this summer. Expo 2017 aims to create a global debate between countries, non-governmental organizations, companies, and general public on the question, how do we ensure safe and sustainable access to energy for all while reducing CO2 emissions? The Energy Best Practice Area Pavilion at Expo 2017 will show the 17 best energy generating projects. These projects were selected from 136 submitted from more than 25 countries. And I would like to invite all of you to the Expo 2017 in Kazakhstan, which will be between 10 June and September this year. Welcome to Kazakhstan, to Astana, to Expo 2017. Let me to finish my presentation, and if you have any questions, we will be available to answer.
Thank you for your presentation. Just a reminder to our colleagues that we still have 5 parties this afternoon to need to go through the multilateral assessment, including Kazakhstan. But we only have 1.5 hours left. So I will encourage parties to just raise very brief questions, and also encourage parties undergoing multilateral assessment also to make very direct response. Just go straight to the point to those questions. I now open the floor for raising questions. I recognize EU, New Zealand, and India. So EU, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Kazakhstan, for the presentation. I have 2 questions. I'll try to be brief. First question, Kazakhstan suspended its ETS until the end of the year. Could you provide more information on the current status of the policy and your plans for the future with the ETS? Sorry. The second question, there are two A and B that is related. The biennial report identifies the main reasons for increasing emissions on cultivated lands, such as loss of soil fertility, improper tillage technologies, and monoculture in crop rotation. What are the main barriers to introducing mitigation measures in the non-forest LULUCF sector, which is currently a source of significant emissions? And are there any plans for policies to reverse these negative impacts? So both the main barriers and if there are any policies to reverse these impacts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now the next speaker, New Zealand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Kazakhstan, for the presentation and also for the invitation at the end to Expo 2017. I hope, or I wish I could make it, hopefully. I just had a quick question for you and wanted to know if you could please provide a little bit of information on how you track the progress of your policies and measures in Kazakhstan. Thank you.
Thank you. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kazakhstan, for a very nice presentation. And being neighbor in the hall for the day, so we have very quick one or two questions. What would be the total amount of emissions covered under the emission trading scheme? Has the potential of reduction through trading been quantified? The second question is, the energy sector shows a steady increase in emissions. What is the level of achievement in terms of reduction of emission intensity in the light of present policies? And last one, more out of our curiosity, what is the cause of forest fires in Kazakhstan? Thank you.
Thank you. Now let me invite Kazakhstan to make a response to those questions. Please, as direct as possible.
Well, good afternoon. Let me first start with the ETS question, as I'm mostly involved in that. Well, yes, we've suspended it until January 1st, 1918. The main reasons was inconsistencies in some of the regulations, plus as many other ETS on early stages, we found out we did over-allocation for the first phases. So the ETS was not really doing its goal, in terms of decreasing real emissions in industrial sectors covered by the ETS. Therefore, we suspended the ETS, and currently we are reviewing the legislation and regulation. The main new features after 2018 would be change of the allocation procedure from grandfathering to benchmarking. The second one would be that the allocations would be based not by company by company basis, but on installation basis covered by the ETS. And we also plan to improve the monitoring, reporting, and verification system.
What are the main barriers to introducing mitigation measures in non-forest LULUCF sector, which is a key source in whole emissions of Kazakhstan? It should be noted that this subcategory is key by trend and is under realization of the governmental policy of GHG emissions reduction by using various technology measures like zero tillage. At present, the area of arable land with implementing the zero tillage techniques technology now has already 3 million hectares, and in 1990 the overall length of arable lands, the territory of arable lands was 35 million hectares, and then it was reduced, and now it's only 24 hectares. And in general, under realization of governmental policy in agriculture sector, according to the concept of transition to green economy, maintains 6 main directions which provide the development of the sector and save the environment, including GHG emissions prevention. And all these technology measures may prevent CO2 emissions from the arable land, but it is plans for the future, and it needs some fundings.
If I may come back to the questions from our distinguished colleague from India. As I said, currently we have not seen any real emissions reductions in the country due to the ETS. Therefore, we suspended it to improve its conditions so that it would serve its primary goal of reducing emissions. As to the energy sector and energy efficiency, yes, energy sector is one of the primary sources of emissions in Kazakhstan, mainly because our energy sector is highly dependent on coal. But as mentioned in the presentation, the current goal to increase electricity produced from gas is 20%. We achieved it already now. The current level is 21 point something. There is also a goal to increase overall energy efficiency of all sectors of Kazakhstan, if I'm not mistaken, 25% until 2020. And the last one was on fires. I'm not an expert on fires, but as far as I know, there are both, anthropogenic and natural causes, because we have very dry and hot summers. And it's both factors, natural and anthropogenic, because people sometimes forget about fire safety in the forests. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now have China, Austria, Sweden on my list. China, you have the floor. Please, brief question, and then also encourage very direct response. We don't have enough time.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question. According to the ERT conclusion that with the existing measures, you face the challenges to achieve 2020 target, but it's possible with additional measures. So could you please do a brief introduction about the most effective additional measures that you take to achieve 2020 target? Thank you.
Thank you. And now invite Austria.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. And at the outset, let me thank to the distinguished delegate of Kazakhstan for this comprehensive and very interesting presentation, and also for the invitation to the expo this year. You showed us your action plan with 141 measures, also including measures on the renewable energy sector. And one of the last slides was on the fixed feed-in tariffs. So I would be interested to know how this staged fixed-in feed-in tariffs supported the increase in renewable energy sources. How did all these policies which affect to date, do we have results, success factors, or lessons learned on the share of renewables in your country? Thank you.
Thank you. And now invite Sweden to speak.
Thank you. I wonder if Kazakhstan has a national system for the monitoring and evaluation of policies and measures, as well as for projections. And if you have a national system, what have you found being the key success factors and lessons learned in the development of national arrangements for policy evaluations? Thank you.
You. And now to invite Kazakhstan to make response quite directly to those questions.
Thank you. Let me first start with the question from Australia about renewable energy. Well, at the time when the legislation or the policy on supporting renewable energy started, the share of renewable energies in the total electricity production was 0.0, maybe one more zero than one. At the moment, we achieved already around 1% renewable energy in the total electricity balance, and we do expect to achieve 3% because there is a pipeline of projects already with investors, which will be launched in the nearest future. We had problems with the fixed-in tariffs and policies, because mainly due to the inflation and change of the currency exchange rate, but they are now hopefully being fixed by the decision to annually review the fixed-in tariffs and to do correction on the inflation and the correction of the exchange rate. And yeah, that's will be my answer to that question. As for the question from China, that's a very, very good question, but I don't have a short answer. It's, as we said, our green economy strategy. This is like an overarching strategy, which is being then divided for different strategy, like every single ministry or every single sector of the industry. They have their action plans how to achieve their overarching strategic goals. This also then comes down to regional levels. At the moment, we are looking at, first of all, energy efficiency in energy production and energy consumption, and of course, higher development of the renewable energy sources. And the last one was national system of evaluation. Well, we have a so-called National Council on Green Economy, which is headed by the President of the Republic. And of course, all the ministries are part of that council, which has regular meetings where different ministries have to report on achieving their policies, which have been adopted before. Because each policy has like an action plan or quantifiable indicator, and they have to report it on annual or like twice a year basis. What is the progress achieving this or that strategic target? So I would call that as a national system of quantifying or tracking the strategic goals.
Thank you very much for your response to those questions. That concludes the multilateral assessment for Kazakhstan. And now let's move to Liechtenstein. I would like to invite Mr. Heike Sommer, Special Representative for Climate Change of Liechtenstein, to deliver a brief presentation. You have the floor.
Thank you for the opportunity to provide an overview of Liechtenstein's climate actions. I would like to start with some background information about the national circumstances of a small country like Liechtenstein. Okay. Liechtenstein is such small that you see the whole country in this picture. Liechtenstein is located in the middle of the Alps, surrounded by Switzerland in the west and south and Austria in the east. The map on the right side displays the topography of the country. Liechtenstein is an alpine country with a total area of only 160 square kilometers, and it's the fourth smallest country within Europe. Around half of Liechtenstein lies in the Central Alps, with the highest elevation, the Grauspitz, at 2,599 meters above sea level. The lowest elevation is the Rückelried at 430 meters. The population of Liechtenstein in 2015 counted for 37,623 inhabitants. Liechtenstein consists of 11 communities with the capital Vaduz. There are 36,755 jobs in Liechtenstein and about 19,625 daily commuters from the neighboring countries. Liechtenstein has a diverse economy with numerous small and medium-sized enterprises as well as some large globally active enterprises. The economy is strong export-oriented due to its small domestic market. Liechtenstein may be small in size, but it's a stable business location with a highly diversified economy comprising over 4,000 businesses and almost as many jobs as inhabitants. The Principality is one of the most highly industrialized states in the world, a strong financial center and an innovative high-tech country. The gross value added by the economic fields consists of the sectors industry and goods productions with 40%, general services with 28%, and financial services with 24%. Agriculture and households contribute with only 8%. Let me give you some historical background of Liechtenstein's activities regarding climate change. In 1995, Liechtenstein ratified the Climate Convention and in 2005 the Kyoto Protocol as Annex B country with a national emission reduction target of -8% compared to 1990 levels. With regard to national policies, it's worth to mention the implementation of the European Emissions Trading Directive in 2007. In 2008, the Energy Efficiency Act came into force, which provides financial support of energy efficiency measures and renewable energy technologies. In 2012, Liechtenstein published its energy strategy, which is also the basis for the projections in Liechtenstein's National Communication and Minor Report. In 2015, Liechtenstein ratified the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol with a -20% target compared to the emissions of the base year in 1990. In the same year, our INDCs were submitted and a new version of our climate strategy was released in 2015 as well. Last year, we signed the Paris Agreement, and this week, the government forwarded the Paris Agreement documents to the Parliament, which will then decide on the government request for ratification in June. Since Liechtenstein reported its greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 until 2015, the country's GDP experienced a growth of about 170%, with an increase of population of around 30%. At the same time, Liechtenstein managed to decouple its economic growth from its greenhouse gas emissions. Despite the growth of its economy, the increase in population and commuters, Liechtenstein's emissions are today below the levels of 1990. The decoupling of greenhouse gas emissions and economic growth is the consequence of the establishment of rigorous environmental standards and a comprehensive set of climate-related policy measures. As you see here in Liechtenstein, the energy sector is the most relevant greenhouse gas source. In 2015, it emitted 162.3 kilotons of CO2 equivalent, which correspond to 81.4% of total emissions. As the energy sector is the main GHG source in Liechtenstein, the policies and measures target mainly the energy sector. The most important measures are the CO2 Act and the introduction of a CO2 levy on fossil fuels, as well as the implementation of the EU ETS and the Energy Efficiency Act. Liechtenstein's Energy Strategy 2020 describes 47 measures in the sectors buildings, transportation, processes and devices, energy production, as well as education and awareness raising. Since there are only 2 levels of governance in Liechtenstein, there is no need for a separate act for each measure. Most of these measures will be implemented by the Office of Economic Affairs. Just recently, the progress report on the energy strategy was published, where the projected energy savings as well as the renewable energy potential was updated. As more than half of the total energy consumption in Liechtenstein depends on fossil fuels, the transport sector provides the highest potential to reduce emissions in the near future. Since 2009, the energy produced by solar power increased until 2015. By the end of 2015, 532 watt peaks per inhabitant were installed in Liechtenstein, producing 17.4 gigawatts of solar energy. Outside the scope of the government, all 11 communities received the energy label. The label Energy City is an efficiency statement for communities which would like to exemplify and implement sustainable energy policies. Energy cities foster sustainable energies environmentally friendly mobility, and implement efficient use of resources. As we're an alpine country, we're especially vulnerable to climate change, as mountainous regions are warming up more rapidly. Our national adaptation strategy is in consultation until next week and will be published this year. Now I've come to the end of my presentation. Even though we are not a member of the Paris Agreement yet, I hope you got an overview of our national circumstances and our commitment in climate action. We take our responsibilities in addressing climate change very seriously and will be hopefully submitting our ratification in time for COP23. And for the questions, I give the word back to you.
Thank you very much for your brief presentation, and now open the floor for parties to raise their questions. New Zealand. You have the floor, New Zealand.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks, Liechtenstein, for your presentation. Just wanting to pick up on something that we read in the review report of your biennial report. Can you please provide more information on your domestic institutional arrangements to monitor, report, and track progress towards your climate change targets? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions that from the parties? If no, I would invite our Liechtenstein to make a response.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you, New Zealand, for the question. The Office of Environment is responsible for all the reporting under the Convention and under the Kyoto Protocol. And with the National Inventory Report, we track progress on our emissions and under the Kyoto target. The Office of Economic Affairs tracks progress on the energy savings and renewable energy production. The progress report of the Energy Strategy 2020 was published last month, which is their monitoring tool. The Office of Environment is in close contact with the Office of Economic Affairs and exchange information regarding new potentials of mitigation actions. As the Office of Environment receives all requested information from the Office of Economic Affairs, we see this as our monitoring tool, as well as to track our progress towards our climate change target. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's no further questions, that concludes the multilateral assessment of Liechtenstein. And now let's move to Luxembourg for their multilateral assessment. I would like to invite Mr. Andrew Weidenhaupt, Premier Councillor of the Government, and Mr. Eric de Barberton, Climate Change Indicators and Statistics, to deliver a brief presentation. Luxembourg, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. Before I start, I would like to say that Luxembourg very much welcomes this session on multilateral assessment, but this has already been stressed also by other colleagues. I think it offers a unique opportunity to share our own situation with respect to greenhouse gas emissions and related commitments, as well as engaging into a constructive exchange of views with other parties. Let me recall that Luxembourg received 8 questions before end of February, and we provided comprehensive answers to these on the portal, and I hope that our answers were sufficiently adequate. Our presentation will be divided in 3 main parts. First, we will, as others did as well, present our national circumstances, so setting the scene. Then we will come to our national greenhouse gas emissions, also looking forward to the development of those. And last not least, our commitments for 2020 and beyond, and all measures or some of the measures put in place. Those that we address are somehow related to the questions that we get. So let me first say a few words about Luxembourg. Luxembourg City is the closest capital city to Bonn, so next door, so to say, even closer than the capital cities of Belgium or other neighboring states of Germany, because I think Brussels is the next closest. And we have 3 neighboring countries, Germany, France, and Belgium. Luxembourg is larger than Liechtenstein and also larger than Monaco that will follow us, but still a very small country. It's the second smallest member state of the European Union after Malta, and its population right now reaches almost 600,000 inhabitants. A couple of other key figures. We had a very strong population growth the last years, as I said already, reaching almost 600,000 inhabitants that stay overnight in Luxembourg. Between 1990 and 2015, we had a population growth of more than 50%, and we estimate to reach, when demographic forecast is exact, as forecasts always are, 950,000 inhabitants by 2050. We have, in addition to that, as Luxembourg, different to Malta, is not an island state, but a very open state in the middle of Western Europe. So we have a lot of cross-border commuters that come every single day to Luxembourg. It were 171,000 by end of December 2015. And they increased also between 1990 and 2015 by 5. So we estimate these also to be 320,000 during a day. So if you add these to the 950,000, you get more than 1 million that stay over the day in each single day in Luxembourg. Next slide. As I already said, we had a strong population growth. We have these very strong cross-border commuters, but in addition to that, we are at the crossroads of several main transit roads across Europe. There's a north-south road that passes from the UK or Belgium or the Netherlands towards France, Italy, and Spain, and another west-eastern road also crossing Luxembourg towards the harbors in Belgium and the Netherlands, which puts a big increase of built-up areas in Luxembourg and also a big increase of transport flows. And we will get back to this. An important thing to keep in mind, these transport flows, of course, are not climate neutral, so to say. And in addition to climate change issues, they also create air emissions, noise, and we are somehow congested. According to the very small country size, if an impact of an additional single source, for instance, a new industrial production facility, of course, leads to a significant increase of related emissions and obviously also to a significant increase of greenhouse gas emissions. With respect to energy supply and energy security, Luxembourg is highly dependent on energy imports, also on electricity imports. We are not a mountain state, so energy production is from renewable energy sources is somehow restricted. There's a potential to focus on wind. We doubled installed wind power the last 3 years. Still, there's additional potential for that. We have photovoltaic panels being put on buildings. We have biomass, and we also rely on geothermal energy when it comes to heating. In this respect, we have addressed a 2030 energy strategy, which we are currently debating with the public, and in addition to that as well, because Luxembourg tries to give a shift of its economy towards a less emissive economy, a more service-based economy. We have launched a large internal consultation last year with civil society and all other stakeholders that we call the third industrial revolution. I will now hand over to my colleague Eric de Brabant, who will go more in depth into the national greenhouse gas emission figures. Eric.
Yes, thank you, André. Yes, I will provide you with some information on the developments of our greenhouse gas emissions through time. So with this first graphic, you have here the evolutions of the total greenhouse gas emissions for Luxembourg. And you see there was a decrease up to 98, then an increase. We reached a peak of our emissions in 2005. And since then, there is another decrease. Actually, we can say that since 1990, the total emissions have been reduced by 20%. And the evolution is really depending on two sectors, as you can see, the industry in gray and the road transportation emission in blue. That was really driving the emissions. Perhaps it's interesting also to notice that since 2005, our emissions have decreased by 21%. 2005 is also a key year for the European countries because our commitments is based on this year 2005. If I move to the next slide, I took out the total so we can better see the evolution. So for the industry, the decrease that we notice is basically due to a shift in the production, the process of production in the steel industry, where the steel industry moved from blast oven furnaces to electrical arc furnaces. We have provided extensive reply on this to Japan, who asked a question about the evolution of this emission and whether or not it was driven by policy. Actually, it was not really driven by policy. It was a decision by the company to move to these new technologies because all the developments were there. It was possible to move to these technologies. What is also interesting to note is the orange line about buildings. So it covers residential buildings as well as commercial and institutional buildings. As you can see, despite what André mentioned, the very important increase in population and also the increase of the economic activity, service, basically, banking sector, financial sectors, and related activities, the emissions for this sector remain rather flat. So there is really a gain there that has been achieved. And a last point, of course, the last point, not of course the least, is the evolution of the road transportation emission that are really now the biggest share of our emissions. All right. In this road transportation emission, just perhaps one thing. Of course, Luxembourg is a small country. We mentioned it's landlocked, but also we are on transit routes. And we have all these commuters coming also to work in Luxembourg. And petrol prices in Luxembourg are relatively cheaper compared to the neighboring countries. As a result, we can say that 3/4 of the fuel sold in Luxembourg is sold to non-resident, but of course is counted in the energy, in the greenhouse gas balance from Luxembourg. So as you can see here, this slide is presenting the evolution of the shares of main sectors, of main sources in our total greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see between 1990 and 2015 that the industry, so this is the second circle, has decreased from 62 to 17%, whereas transportation has increased from 20% to 55% of our total greenhouse gas emissions. And as you can see, on the total greenhouse gas emissions, the emissions related to fuel sales to non-residents is almost 40%. Okay. Concerning now our projections for 2020 and 2030, these are the amounts that we are now projecting in our latest projections that we have prepared in April, so a month ago. And you can see that we are expecting basically a decrease in the total emissions related to road transportation, as well as for the buildings in the country, which are the two main sources for Luxembourg nowadays. For the other sectors, it's rather flat, let's say, for the projections. Another interesting slide to present for Luxembourg is the greenhouse gas intensity and the evolution of the greenhouse gas emissions per capita. You can see from this that we have experiencing a decoupling in this for these two ratio. As far as greenhouse gas per capita are concerned, you can see that in 2005, we were still at 27.6 tons per capita, which is very high. But of course, as I mentioned, 40% of the emissions are coming to fuel sales to non-resident, but we have to count them. And we drop already to 17.8 in 2015. So it's a minus 35% in this emission per capita. And if we look at the forecast that I just presented before, we could drop to 11.4 tons per inhabitants in 2030. So it's quite ambitious also to reach this target if our projections are met, of course. When you look at the greenhouse gas intensity, we are amongst the 5 EU member states with the lowest greenhouse gas intensity. And this intensity reduced by 40% between 2005 and 2015. In fact, it's a bit relevant to consider these evolutions for Luxembourg because we have to keep in mind the important population and economic growth that André mentioned. And also, there is something that could explain the high per capita. I mentioned, of course, the fuel sales. But in fact, compared to bigger countries, we don't have a big hinterland. You do 20 kilometers and you're outside of Luxembourg. So lots of emissions are counted for Luxembourg, but are actually happening somewhere else. And so it cannot be really diluted like in the biggest country. That could explain why we have this high per capita emission still. But you can see it's decreasing, so it's encouraging. Now, a few words about the commitments from Luxembourg. I won't be going into lots of details because actually some member states, Greece this morning was quite extensive on that, and Ireland also we call the EU context. So you have here on this slide, on top of the slide, the EU-wide commitment of minus 10% and minus 30%, which is a proposal for 2030 at EU level for the non-ETS sector, so for the sector which is not covered by the exchange of emission rights. For Luxembourg, this translates at national level by an objective of minus 20% compared to 2005 for 2020. And the proposal put on the table by the Commission for 2030 is that we have to reduce compared to 2005 by 40% our emissions. The criteria that is used is basically the GDP per capita, which is of course very high in Luxembourg. So we have the most ambitious targets of all the EU member states. Voilà. I won't go into these two slides here because they have been presented extensively this morning by Greece or later on by Ireland in the afternoon. So this is 2020 commitments. It recalls the situation for EU countries and for Luxembourg. I just mentioned it. And the 30 commitments which are on the table and discussed at the moment at EU level. Then my last slide for me, then I will give the floor back to André for policies and measures, is to look at our projections up to 2020. So on this slide, you can see the blue line, which are the historical emissions up to 2015. These are the data coming from our latest submissions to the UNFCCC, the submission of 15th of April of this year. The red line, this is the trajectory that Luxembourg has to respect in the context of the effort-sharing decision at EU level. And you can see already that for 2013, 14, and 15, we are below the level that was assigned to Luxembourg. Then you got the dotted line, which are on light blue is the anticipated emissions. So only the ESD emissions, so the emissions excluding ETS sector for the scenario with existing measures, and then, and then we are party like the others. And then we have the emissions for the without additional measure scenario, which is presented there. As you can see at the end, in 2020, according to our forecast, we will be slightly above the target for Luxembourg. But overall, over the 2013 and 2020 period, we will be compliant with the objectives that were assigned to Luxembourg. I will now give to André for policies and measures.
Okay, so let me briefly introduce some of our policies and measures. First, addressing the building sector. We have launched a program to increase the energy efficiency standard for new residential buildings with respect to heating and hot water through better insulation, ventilation, and the use of renewable energy sources. It is mandatory in Luxembourg as of the 1st January 2017 to build for new houses. New houses are exclusively built on a zero energy standard. So this is, I think we are the pioneers in this respect. In some countries, this is the fact for some regions, but not for a whole country. And we have set up a package of measures, which we call Prim House, which are the subsidies. We have set up a system to give loans for those that invest in this direction. We call it Klimabank. We have a one-stop shop for administrative purposes to accelerate them. And in last not least, we also link all these subsidies to sustainable criteria, which we call LENOTS, which stand for the Luxembourgish abbreviation for sustainable development. Then we have considered that non-state actors are important as well when it comes to policy and measures for climate change. And we have set up a program, a voluntary program with all Luxembourgish municipalities. And this map shows in different green colors the progress the municipalities made in this program, which is basically building on implementing a quality management system relating to energy and climate policy, and in addition to that also consultancy, energy management, and so on. And you see there's only one out of 105 municipalities that still remains white. All others have joined this, what we call energy pact, and we have also a quality assurance label, which is made up by the European Energy Award Scheme. I think it was already mentioned by Liechtenstein as well. Then, as an answer to a question that has been raised by Japan, we have set up, the government has set up a voluntary scheme with Luxembourg industry. So basically more than 60 companies, and that's a lot in our small country, have joined to this voluntary commitment to reduce their energy consumption and to build into a 70% increase in energy efficiency between 2017 and 2020. The system has been in place already for the previous years, but this year it has been renewed once more for the period covering 2017 to 2020. We have put in relation to this high content of transport in our overall greenhouse gas emissions, we have set up a set of policies and measures in this respect. Already in 2007, we introduced a carbon fuel tax, the so-called Kyoto cent, that is 2 euro cent per liter of gasoline or 2.5% per liter of diesel sold at the pump. And in addition to that, also a carbon-related passenger's car tax. So a share of 40% of the passenger's car tax is related to the carbon intensity. Both taxes feed into the National Climate and Energy Fund, which basically is used to finance Luxembourg's international climate finance initiatives. So Luxembourg has committed 120 million euro for the period 2014 to 2020, which puts Luxembourg next to Sweden as the largest per capita contributor to international climate finance. I'm aware that our absolute amount is much lower than the Swedish one or the one of other parties, but as a per capita commitment, it's a very large one. And in addition, the Climate and Energy Fund is also used for national mitigation measures. In relation to transport, we have another more Luxembourg-based concept, what we call sustainable mobility, mobilité durable or MODU, which basically tends to gear us into a 25% of mobility by slow mobility forces, so the pedestrians going by foot or walking, and the cyclists, and another 75% that is 3/4 individual mobility and 25% of collective mobility. Luxembourg is right now building a new tram and also building new commuter installations to help people that commute every day, not commuting by their own private cars. And then, last not least, Luxembourg also, in a way to facilitate the electrification of the individual mobility, has introduced a set of fiscal measures. So there's a fiscal abatement if you buy a zero low emission car as of 2017. Also, if you buy a bike or even an e-bike, there are fiscal benefits in kind for leased cars. 50% of Luxembourgish car sales are leased cars. So that's a very attractive measure to address these. And leased cars are also somehow used by the transporter commuters. So with this respect, we also tackle a part of this fuel sales that takes place, and that has already been mentioned by Eric. Then, as of next year, the public administration will exclusively purchase electric and plug-in hybrid cars. And in order to make this work, we set up also a whole set of charging stations. This will be my last slide. This gives a little bit the, let's call it circus, because I have put them around the centerpiece, which is this third industrial revolution. It summarizes all our measures. So as already said by Eric, the 2030 climate and energy framework of the European sets the scene. We have, in addition to that, the national agenda 2030 that is right now in a conclusive phase and will be presented in New York at the HLPF in July. Then we are developing a low carbon development strategy which covers the mid-century strategy as asked for in the Paris Agreement. Obviously, we have ratified the Paris Agreement in October 2016. As already mentioned by me earlier, we have a 2030 energy strategy that we are setting up. And then last not least, we are right now drafting our third national action plan for reducing CO2 emissions. With that, Mr. Chair, I finish our presentation, and Luxembourg, as all others, is happy to answer all questions that will be asked by parties. Thanks.
Thank you, Luxembourg, for your presentation. And now open the floor for any questions that I recognize India, Korea, Canada, India. I think India. Yeah. Korea, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you for a nice presentation. I think Luxembourg has committers from neighboring countries, right? Huge number of the committers. I'm curious about how Luxembourg deal with the GHG emission by committers from neighboring countries. such as road transportation in terms of GH accounting and reduction policies? Thank you.
Thank you. And now invite Canada.
Thank you, Chair. I was hoping Luxembourg could share some of the key factors in its success achieving such a significant uptake by municipalities of the Voluntary Energy Pact.
Thank you. And now invite India.
Yeah, thank you, Luxembourg, for an excellent presentation. I have a very similar question to what was asked by the delegate from Korea. You mentioned that there is a large share of emissions which is increasing from the road sector. You have mentioned about number of solutions like public transport, electric mobility, and carbon tax. But what is the reason for the low prices of gasoline? I believe that Luxembourg is not a oil producing country, but so is it an inefficient fuel subsidy, and how do you want to tackle this? Thank you.
Thank you. And now I invite Luxembourg to provide your response. Please be brief and quite direct to those questions.
Yes, thank you very much for these questions and your interest. I will tackle the question that was asked by Korea, and then I will give the floor to André for the two other questions. About the calculations of the emissions from road transportations for non-resident people, how do we proceed? Well, actually, we have got, of course, the energy balance. So we got the total energy that is demanded and consumed in the country. So what are we doing? We have a model that is an Austrian model. We use a model developed that Austria is also using for its greenhouse gas inventories that will calculate and estimate what is the part that is attributed to the resident population. So it's based on the number of cars which are licensed in Luxembourg, hypothesis on the kilometers done and everything, and of course the different Euro norm for the different for the vehicles. Then this model will calculate an energy consumption for the national fleet, to which we will of course apply emission factors taking into account the composition of the gasoline and diesel. We have country-specific emission factors for that. And then the remaining part, which is not covered by this calculation, is attributed to non-resident population. So and then we calculate that with default factors to have an emissions for the road fuel exports, as we call them, so the fuel which is sold to non-residents. But of course, this is important to keep in mind for the review. We are exactly calibrating everything on the calculation on the energy balance. So all the energy that is reported as being fuel sold for cars is of course accounted for in our inventories.
Thank you, Eric. So maybe I continue first with my answer to India because it's basically in the same line, and then I would address the answer to the question that was raised by Canada. Let's say the explanations from Eric are given Luxembourg as a lot of small states in open economies apply has tax regimes which are not very high, yet all its tax regimes, and this applies also to the excise duties for fuel sales, apply the European legislation. European Union has set minima amounts for excise duties to fuel sales, and Luxembourg applies these. Yet there are other member states that, for one reason or another, apply higher taxes, and then there is the question to be answered, to be asked to those why they apply higher taxes and Luxembourg applies lower taxes. Given this, the excise duties for diesel sales are higher in Belgium than in Luxembourg, and still Luxembourg has a very large share of diesel sales for heavy-duty vehicles, and this is another reason for this is what I already explained as well, is these crossroads of the north-south or south-north and east-west transport roads that pass through Luxembourg. I cannot give you this is basically historic growth in this very region. I say this very region because Luxembourg is 150 kilometers away of Bonn, and you see a lot of traffic moving around also around Bonn, and that's one of the reasons as well. So the highways cross in Luxembourg and not in 10 kilometers north or west or whatever. I cannot explain why this has been taken place. So it's based on both the existing road infrastructure that passes through Luxembourg and the choice to be at the more lower end of in the framework that is given by the European Union when it comes to taxes. Canada's question in relation to our success story in the Climate Pact, I think that's the advantage of being small. There are disadvantages, but there are also advantages. So basically in Luxembourg, the 105 mayors know each other and know the government ministers know us. And if you want to come with, let's say, to come with some movement, it's easy to have all 105 municipalities invited to the ministry and to try to ask them to build into such a movement as well. And obviously, the subsidies we provide for private buildings, we provide also subsidies for public buildings. So if a municipality renovates existing buildings when it comes to energy efficiency, if they are in the Climate Pact, they get the possibility to get subsidies, and if they have not joined this, they get lower subsidies. They also if they join this energy pact, they get subsidies for energy consultants by means of the so-called My Energy, which is Luxembourg's renewable and energy efficiency agency, and so on. So basically, it's built on a collective action by all and the commitment also of local politicians. And as soon as you produce, as I have now shown, maps as the one I have shown, you can imagine prior that all municipalities had joined, the pressure on those that had not joined yet was very high when we started in drafting these green colored maps.
Thank you very much for your very good response to those questions. Now I would like to move on to Morocco for the next one. As the next one, I would like to invite Mr. Patrick Rowland, Deputy Director, Department of Environment, to deliver a brief presentation. Morocco, you have the floor.
Thank you. But Monaco, not Morocco, instead. And Mr. Chair, distinguished delegate, on behalf of Monaco, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to present our climate policy and the progress we made in reaching our emission reduction target within the framework of the second multilateral assessment. As it seems we are concluding today for the small European country, we also would like to start with a few words about national circumstances. Monaco is located on the north shore of Mediterranean Sea. France is the only country sharing a border with Monaco, with a land surface about 2 square kilometers and a population of about 38,000 citizens. Monaco is the second smallest and the most densely populated country in the world. As a result, almost its entire territory is urbanized, leaving no space for agricultural land or forest. Monaco benefits from a mild Mediterranean climate with hot and dry summer and wet, temperate winter. Monaco represents a labor pool of 53,000 employment, which results in a significant daily cross-border traffic. Monaco's economy is diversified, Most of its revenue comes from finance, insurance, services, trade, tourism, industry, and real estate. In 2050, the GDP was 5.64 billion euro. Monaco is a net importer of energy. Electricity represents a major part of the total energy consumption. Monaco and France maintain a close relationship on political and economical level. Several agreements with France on electricity, gas, and fuel provide identical energy price for both countries. Monaco ratified the Kyoto Protocol on the 27th of February 2006. Within the first period of the Kyoto Protocol, with an objective of 8% decrease, Monaco achieved a 13% reduction. In December 2030, Monaco became the first Annex 1 party which ratified the Doha Amendment to the Kyoto Protocol. During this period, Monaco will have to keep its emission at an average of 22% below the reference year, aiming 30% reduction target by 2020. In October 2016, Monaco ratified Paris Agreement. Within this framework, Monaco submitted NDC with an emission reduction target of 50% by 2030. During the New York UN Climate Summit, Prince Albert II reiterated the commitment to reduce domestic emission by 80% and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. In this pathway, Monaco has reduced its GHG emission of 70.7% in 2015. In addition to its climate commitment, Monaco is also committed to the following energy targets by 2020. A 20% increase in energy efficiency in building, a consumption of 20% of final energy produced from renewables. Monaco climate commitment and energy target are part of a global energy and climate actions, which implement and coordinate technical, financial, regulatory, and awareness measures in the area of housing, territory planning, energy supply, transport, and governance. Monaco Energy and Climate Plan will be updated this year in order to integrate the 2030 climate targets and to initiate a low-carbon strategy framework. According to a 2015 inventory, our global emission represent about 82 kilotons CO2 equivalent. Regarding GHG emission distribution, the energy sector represents about 88% of Monaco global emissions. Those emissions are allocated within three categories. First, the energy production accounting for 26% of global emission. These emissions are generated by an energy from waste facility which produce electricity and steam to supply a distribution network. In second, transport represents about 30% of Monaco global emission, corresponding to the fuel sale for domestic navigation, aviation, and road transportation. Finally, domestic fuel and natural gas in building heatings represent as well 30% of our global emission. Regarding the other sector, industrial process and product use represent about 9% of the country emission, mainly due to CFC and HFC gases in refrigeration, mobile and stationary air conditioning. Agriculture, forestry, and other land use emissions are very low, less than 0.1% of the total. Finally, emissions from the waste sector take only into account wastewater treatment for 3.7% of global emissions. Regarding the global emission trends, the maximum peaks was observed in 2000, with about 108 kilotons CO2 equivalent. In 2015, we account a reduction of 17.6 kilotons CO2 equivalent. This is due to the gradual decrease of the energy sector emissions since 2000, and in 2015, the reduction in this sector was about 27% from the reference year. On the other hand, we cannot the increase of the emission in the industrial sector due to the generalization of the use of F-gases. The main GHG emission sector is energy, and it's in this sector where undertaken policies and measures have produced major results. Regarding the energy from waste facility, a government decision in 2011 allowed a tonnage limitation of incinerated waste at 50,000 tons per year. This measure aimed to limit the quantity of foreign waste incinerated with the municipal solid waste from Monaco. For housing heating, urban renewal and the ban of domestic fuel boiler in new building are the main measures leading to a significant decrease of the emission for this category, from 45 to 24 CO2 equivalent. Quantifying the direct effect of policy and measure within the transport is more difficult since many of them have indirect effect. The implementation of politic and measure in transport results in a progressive improvement of air quality as well as transport condition in Monaco. This mobility policy is linked to a gradual decline in fuel sale on the territory. According to Monaco, second biennial report projection, meeting the 2020 target of 30 emission reduction is not entirely ensured by domestic reduction. Following Monaco current action plan, the expected emission reduction is around minus 23.7% in 2020, with an average of 21.4% during the period, as to be compared with a 22% Quero commitment. Therefore, additional measures are currently being defined, planned, or implemented. An update of the GHG emission projection considering those recent developments will be provided in the 7th national communication. However, the use of market mechanism is not excluded for compliance. Additional measures are implemented in order to achieve current and NDC mitigation targets. The first measure concerns the energy sector, in which the emission reduction potential remains the highest. For the energy production sector, Monaco achieved in 2050 a new waste prevention and management plan by 2030. The main objectives of this plan are to reduce the quantity of national waste generation and incineration despite the population growing, to increase waste recovery, to reduce the plastic part in the municipal waste, to reduce the quantity of imported waste by 2019. In March 2015, Monaco launched an initiative in favor of an environment award trade. In this first section, this initiative aims to eliminate the use of plastic bags among retailers, and this measure will be included within upcoming regulatory text. Regarding the energy from waste facility renewal, Monaco is currently carrying out studies on this new installation, focusing on both waste treatment and process, energy production optimization, and emission, including CO2 capture. For the transport, the government is still promoting clean vehicle through the strengthening of the electric or hybrid vehicle purchase grant, as well as the improvement of soft mobility with pedestrian walkways and electric bicycle rental. Monaco has also undertaken the development of a public transport system and infrastructure as multipurpose commuter parkings, public transportation with specific lanes, cableway, and urban logistic enforcement for freight. With the development of this infrastructure, Monaco will expand the interoperability and the interlinkage of the transfer system. As part of the reinforcement of its energy climate action plan, Monaco is also focusing on an energy transition in buildings. The first measure concerns domestic fuel ban by 2022. Alternatively, Monaco is phasing before 2025 renewable heating cooling network extension. In the energy efficiency scope, an energy performance regulation enforcement for new construction and renovation is undertaken and will be implemented before 2018. A subsidy for high efficiency double gaze window, it's also at its last stage of validation and the obligation to carry out energy audit in apartment and building. In addition, the development of smart metering system by our energy provider, the government will propose an energy efficiency program based on non-intrusive appliance load monitoring for the large consumer. A 4% reduction in Monaco's total electricity consumption is expected from this program. In a specific urban context of Monaco, the development of solar energy has also been undertaken. In the industry sector, Monaco is also working on regulation for fluorinated gas and certificate of capacity for professionals. Then, within the Paris Agreement momentum and in order to enforce climate change policy, Monaco has increased in implementation capacity. The first measure was the creation of an energy transition department within the Ministry of the Environment. The Energy Transition Department aims to develop financial incentive mechanisms, investments in the renewable energy, and energy efficiency in the scope of GHG mitigation. Its first mission is within the edition of a White Book in March 2017 to extend a non-government stakeholder climate change consent by large consultation. Regarding climate policy planning, Monaco will initiate within the next month the update of its air energy climate plans. These territorial plans would include air quality, adaptation to climate change, and a special focus on the global energetic transition strategy. To improve the quality management of its climate energy action plan, the Principality of Monaco has decided in 2011 to integrate a 4-year cycle of certification system within the European Energy Award label. This process is recycled in 2080, allow to enhance common climate action management. And the next slide concludes our presentation.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
For your presentation, Monaco. And I open the floor for questions. I see no questions. I think you already give us a very rich and comprehensive presentation. So if there's no further questions, we would like to move on to the next parties that would go through the multilateral assessment, which is Portugal. This is the last party for today's multilateral assessment section. I would like to invite Mr. Edgardo Santos, Head of Department of Climate Change, to deliver a brief presentation. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. I would like to start off saying that, as others, we welcome the multilateral assessment process, and also stating that this new setting, moving us away from the more formal plenary style setting, is also, in our view, conducive to open exchanges and enhancing transparency of action. In our view, the multilateral assessment shows the strong benefits of transparency and of a robust reporting and monitoring system applicable to all, and I will come back to this a bit later on my presentation. In terms of our commitments, Portugal's commitments, I will take the lead from my colleague of Ireland, which started this afternoon session, in saying that both the EU in Marrakesh has already been assessed, and some other EU member state colleagues have had the opportunity also to extensively report on the way our commitments of EU and its member states are being developed. So in this slide, I would only focus in two issues. One, that to state that the emissions trading scheme is a crucial instrument of climate policy, and the second, to underline the non-ETS Portugal's target for 2020, which is to limit the growth of its emissions to 1% compared to 2005 levels. I will then move on to other commitments by Portugal. These are national commitments that were established under the climate change program, which go beyond the commitments that are established for 2020 and proposed for 2030 under EU legislation. So under this program, as I was saying, we have established targets both for 2020, a band of targets both for 2020 and 2030. We have also established for the non-ETS sectors sectoral targets both for 2020 and 2030. And in Marrakesh, we have announced that we have the objective of being carbon neutral by 2050. So this is a new orientation that we are now starting to work on in order to derive and analyze what options are there on the table in order to achieve this objective. Let me, other national objectives for renewables, both for 2020 and 2030. The 2030 objective is a national objective, and also national objectives for improvement in energy efficiency, also both for 2020 and 2030. These are all established also under the climate change program. Apart from establishing the targets, the climate change program also defines the institutional architecture of managing climate change issue in Portugal, and identifies a set of possible policies, ones that are already being implemented and others to be further analyzed, and with a view to either being studied and eventually adopted and implemented. This is a picture of the trajectories of the commitments that I was underlining previously up until 2030, and this basically describes the trajectories that we are foreseeing in terms of overall emissions, ETS sector, and non-ETS sectors, and within the non-ETS sectors, the sectoral targets. That is what is outlined here. And I would invite you to further analyze either in our report or through this presentation that is being displayed afterwards in the website. So our trend in emissions from 1990 to 2015, we have seen a decreasing trend of emissions since 2005. In more recent years, stabilization, and in 2015 we see that that increase there, which basically accounts for electricity production by coal, given that 2015 was a very dry year, and so there was the need for thermal power plants to kick in, and that is, at the moment, with the circumstances that there are in terms of pricing, coal. Moving ahead to our climate policy institutional architecture, I would like to draw your attention to three issues, three main points in this. One is at the top, you will see that there is instituted or established an interministerial commission on climate change and air policy. This commission is presided by the Ministry of Environment, the Minister of Environment, and it has representatives at ministerial level of all the relevant sectors for climate change and air policy. And this is the second point I would like to make, that this addresses all of the components of climate change, but also given its close relation, and in order to make use of co-benefits of policies, also air policy implementation under this interministerial commission. The third point I would like to make here is to draw your attention also to the monitoring, assessment and reporting functions that are there in orange, basically under the national system for inventories, which is something that it's in place in Portugal since 2005, and the more recent national system for policies and measures and inventories, which is very closely linked to the national system for inventories, and it was established last year. The objective of this national system for policies and measures and inventories is basically to provide the forum for discussions and among the sectoral representatives in order to do just what the name describes, assessing policies and measures and working on inventories and projections. Moving ahead to progress in terms of meeting our targets and also in terms of my concluding remarks on this presentation in the following 3 slides. We are on track to meeting our 2020 targets, as you can see from this picture, and I would add that we are also on track to meet our 2030 targets. And we are doing this while we are decoupling emissions and from economic growth. We are doing this basically through innovation, new approaches, promoting more efficient use of resources, including energy. My final slide on concluding remarks. Portugal is looking at developing a competitive, resilient, and low-carbon economy. That is our, oops, I'm sorry about this. I think okay. That is our aim in terms of developing the climate policy. There seems to be something, okay. I will let, okay, that is there. As I mentioned, decoupling economic growth from emissions and resource consumption while creating new sustainable jobs, mainstreaming climate policy, both adaptation and mitigation in sectoral policies, and further ambition to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your brief presentation. I now open the floor for questions from parties. Any questions? Brazil? India? What's the next? Can you raise your flag? New Zealand. Okay, Brazil, you have the floor first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Portugal, for the very complete presentation. I wish to thank the Portuguese delegation for answering all our questions that were made earlier. And I wish to congratulate Portugal on setting goals that go beyond regional objectives, on the advances in terms of energy efficiency and use of renewable resources, also for the clear structure of governments for climate change. I think it's very inspiring. And finally, to congratulate for you to be on track to meeting 2020 targets. So that will be my comments. Congratulations from our delegation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now invite India.
I also join Brazil in complimenting the distinguished delegate from Portugal for making a very beautiful presentation. We are wanting to know, because a reduction is seen in almost all aspects, including population and GDP. So are the possibilities of emission reduction due to economic slowdown being analyzed? And the other question is, to what extent Has the emission trading mechanism been successful in achieving emission reductions in Portugal? Thank you.
Thank you, India. And now invite New Zealand to raise their questions.
I too want to thank Portugal for your presentation. Our question is on renewable energy. Can you please inform us how you're progressing towards your target for renewable energy to account for 40% of final energy consumption by 2030? Thank you.
I now invite Portugal to make a response to those questions.
Well, thank you very much both for the comments and for the questions. With regards to India's questions, indeed, and as this question has been raised before, indeed the economic crisis did have an effect on our emission and on our emissions trajectories. But I would like to point out that we have been seeing that downward trend in terms of emissions ever since 2005, and our estimates of our projections with existing measures continue to point to that the continuation of that downward trend, realizing the potential that there is in terms of emission reductions. With regards to the ETS, there are not concrete and quantified figures in terms of the emission reductions achieved in Portugal with that regards. In the traditional notion of analyzing a policy, given that the EU ETS is a European global system. I would point, however, that we have seen definitely a change in the management boards and in the decision-making processes of several companies in order to consider this issue. This is the price of carbon, even at a low price as it is today. It is an issue that is nowadays mainstream in the discussions in the boardrooms of major players and major companies. And this is, I think, one of the key successes of the EU ETS, putting this issue up front and center in terms of the discussions that business is undertaking. And it is a crucial undertaking for the future. With regards to the question from New Zealand, what we do see from all of our analysis, well, backing up a little bit, I think that we have seen from 2003, 2005, the results of a successful implementation of a renewables deployment program, mostly with regards to wind power. What we are seeing now is that we have an enormous untapped potential in terms of solar, and I would say that this would be the next stage of the development of a renewable strategy. It's still under analysis and undertaking further elaboration, but I would say that this is definitely where we see the biggest potential. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope that India and New Zealand already had a very satisfactory response from Portugal, and that if no further question, that would conclude the multilateral assessment of Portugal. And colleagues, we have now heard from all parties scheduled today of the multilateral assessment section, and I'm very happy that I see that all colleagues participate in a very constructive manner. I think we really have a very fruitful discussion today, and I'm sure we all benefit from this kind of exercise. And also, thank you for your cooperation in helping us to manage the time, and we can conclude our discussion on time by 6 o'clock. And I now would like to suspend the section and resume tomorrow morning and Saturday at 10 p.m. at 10 a.m. also in the same room. I thank you very much. Do I need to gavel? No. Thank you.